In just one night, Elise Matsunaga went from a devoted wife living in a multi-million-dollar mansion to the center of a sensational case that captivated both Brazil and Japan. Her husband, Marcos Kitano Matsunaga, a millionaire CEO and heir to the Japanese-Brazilian Matsunaga fortune, vanished without a trace, only for his dismembered body to be discovered in 3 suitcases scattered in a forest. Who was truly behind this brutal crime? And what psychological unraveling led to one of the most shocking cases in recent memory? This is Crime Documentary Files. In 2010, Elise Matsunaga was 38 years old and living with her husband, 42-year-old Marcos Kitano Matsunaga, in a city in southern Brazil. Marcos was the CEO and heir of a major food company named Yoki, founded by his grandfather and named after him. Despite his young age, Marcos was already a millionaire. His company specialized in prepackaged frozen foods, catering to the fast-paced lifestyle of modern consumers. The family business had been passed down through generations. While Marcos was fortunate to inherit it, his business acumen and leadership were no less impressive. Before marrying Elise, Marcos had been married once before. Given his average looks, finding a partner wasn't exactly easy in the marriage market. Frankly speaking, in Western societies, without the backing of wealth, he likely wouldn't have attracted much attention. But thanks to his fortune, not only did he secure a second marriage, he was also frequently surrounded by attractive blonde women. Marcos was an avid wine enthusiast and a passionate collector of firearms. Even while married, he had a habit of hiring escorts. He often registered on websites to look for beautiful blonde women. His first encounter with Elise also happened through one such site, called M-Class Official. In reality, the site was more of a high-end escort service. If you paid enough, you got what you wanted. Simply put, it allowed wealthy men to pay for sex. Initially, Elise and Marcos's relationship was purely transactional. But Marcos soon realized that Elise was different. She wasn't just selling her body. She had her own thoughts, ambitions, and dreams. Eventually, Marcos offered her full financial support and began introducing her to friends, though he never revealed to them, or to his family, that their relationship had begun as a client and sex worker. According to Marcos, Elise was deeply understanding and showed genuine interest in all his hobbies. Not many women enjoy hunting and firearms, but in these areas, they bonded over shared passions. It must be said, knowing how to present yourself is truly an art. Among all the escorts on the site, only Elise captured Marcos's attention. Despite being wealthy, he was extremely selective, and it was Elise who fascinated him to the point of obsession. Eventually, he decided to divorce his first wife and build a future with Elise. But who exactly was Elise? Her background was complex. Elise was born into an extremely poor family in Brazil. Her biological father abandoned her right after birth. Her stepfather, who came later, was abusive, both physically and emotionally. Elise recalled that as a child she was often chased and cornered by groups of boys, with no one ever stepping in to protect her. She was even kidnapped for several days by a man with a scar on his face. For girls growing up in the slums, misfortunes like these were all too common. According to Elise, the experiences she went through weren't unusual in the place she grew up. Many girls around her lived through the same kind of misery and suffering. As she got older, Elise managed to escape the abusive stepfather and the harsh life of the slums. She focused on her studies and eventually grew into a woman full of love and compassion, with a decent education to match. When it came time to choose a career, Elise wanted to do something that helped others. She eventually became a nurse, a profession that allowed her to express the kindness and empathy she carried within. However, she soon realized that witnessing her patients' deaths was emotionally overwhelming. The grief and sorrow stayed with her long after they were gone, as if each loss was that of a family member. At one point, Elise even fell into depression. It became clear this career was not sustainable for her. She needed to find a new path. Elise thought about becoming a lawyer and applied to law school. But with no financial support and the high cost of tuition, she turned to sex work to support herself. She admitted being drawn to the idea of pleasing men in exchange for money and luxury. Most of the time, wealthy clients would take her on expensive dates, and if the price was right, they'd spend the night together. It was through this line of work that Elise met millionaire Marcos. The Matsunaga family, founded by Marcos's grandfather, was considered one of the wealthiest families in Brazil. When the business passed down to Marcos, he lived up to the family's legacy. Yoki Foods remained a market leader, dominating the frozen food sector across the country. Marcos was also known for pushing partnerships and collaborations within the food industry. This single strategy alone allowed him to surpass all the business achievements of his father. He was largely credited for elevating the Matsunaga family name to national fame in Brazil. Yet, despite all his professional success, Marcos seemed to lack emotional intelligence when it came to women. No matter how accomplished he was, the exceptional women around him showed little genuine interest. Given his wealth and status, he was constantly surrounded by attractive, capable women, but unfortunately, the only thing that consistently attracted them was his bank account. There's little documentation about Marcos's first wife, but it's apparent she wasn't the ideal partner he had envisioned. Dissatisfied, Marcos began hiring escorts, slipping into a cycle of marital deceit. His behavior revealed a distorted belief that wealthy men cheat, and if they can't, they'll find a way to afford it. Marcos had hired countless escorts over the years, until he met Elises, the one who captured his full attention. During their dates, he preferred a sense of natural romance. He liked his partner to dress elegantly, almost like a refined princess, and Elises, who knew exactly how to charm men, played the role perfectly. What surprised Marcos the most was that this seemingly delicate woman shared his passion for hunting and was even willing to trek into the wilderness with him. When they brought down big game, she would help him skin the animals and preserve the pelts as keepsakes. To him, she felt like a gift from above. For a long time, Marcos kept Elises a well-guarded secret. Even when traveling with his wife, he'd book a separate hotel room for Elises. When he finally introduced her to his friends, they immediately questioned, why was such a beautiful young woman involved with someone so much older like Marcos? And what exactly were her intentions? It didn't take long for the word gold digger to surface. No further explanation needed. Everyone knew what it meant. A young woman trying to make money off her looks, usually by dating wealthy, older men who lacked physical appeal. When news broke that Marcos had decided to divorce his wife and marry Elises, some of his friends took to social media to say things like, has he lost his mind? How can he not see what's really going on? One of his former teachers even commented, I think Marcos has a serious issue with personal security. After exchanging wedding rings, Elises quickly moved into the mansion, and that's when she discovered the full extent of her husband's wealth. In the basement, there was an enormous wine cellar. Marcos was a dedicated wine collector and connoisseur. It was estimated that the cellar held nearly $2 million worth of rare wines. In another hidden room, the house was packed with firearms, with a total collection value of over $500,000. The mansion was also filled with expensive artwork. You could easily imagine what kind of extravagant taste this businessman had. He even kept a pet snake in the house. Marcos once proudly told his friends, I still can't believe I found a woman who lets me keep a snake at home. It was clear that he was genuinely happy to have found someone who truly understood and accepted him. Contrary to what Marcos's friends had predicted, the marriage turned out to be relatively happy and lasted nearly a decade. The couple traveled the world together, exploring new cultures and enjoying life's finer things. Eventually, they decided to have a child. At first, they thought it would be easy, but they were wrong. No matter how hard they tried, Elises couldn't get pregnant. Fortunately, they had the money to pursue in vitro fertilization. After more than a dozen attempts, Elises finally became pregnant, and they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into their lives. Seeing how much love the couple had for each other, even Marcos's friends had to admit they had misjudged her. At the very least, their earlier fears seemed unfounded. Meanwhile, Marcos's career continued to soar. He was in the middle of negotiating a $1 billion acquisition deal with a major business partner. But then, just as success seemed within reach, Marcos Matsunaga, the billionaire food mogul, vanished without a trace. His disappearance was sudden and shocking, especially given that it occurred right as he was finalizing a deal worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So, when Elise reported her husband missing, the police immediately suspected a possible kidnapping. Perhaps a ransom was involved. Detectives questioned everyone in Marcos's life, but friends and family all described him as a gentle man, someone who avoided conflict and bore no grudges. Other than the high-stakes deal, there were no obvious red flags. And even that deal wasn't harming anyone. Police later interviewed Marcos's wife, Elise, hoping to learn more about his daily routine and movements on the day he disappeared. Elise told investigators that on the day Marcos vanished, he had said he was going to a meeting and had a business dinner that evening, including one with an investor who was ready to put $1 billion into his company. She added that Marcos told her the meeting might run very late, so she shouldn't wait up for him. That night, Elise didn't see her husband, so she put their daughter to bed alone. She remembered him saying he had an early meeting the next morning and might sleep at the office. When she woke up the next day and saw he wasn't home, she assumed he had stayed overnight at work. But from that moment on, she never saw him again. Elise's statements reinforced the police's initial suspicion of a kidnapping for ransom. They believed Marcos may have been abducted from work. But as days passed, the family waited for a ransom call that never came, and no clues surfaced. That's when police began to suspect they might be looking in the wrong direction. Just as they were ramping up efforts to locate Marcos, Elise paid a visit to her in-laws and revealed something she hadn't shared with the police. She claimed that Marcos had packed a bag and left the house voluntarily, with the intention of abandoning her and their daughter. When asked why, she said he had a mistress and had run off with her. Elise said she had known about the affair for a while, but when she unexpectedly found out she was pregnant, Marcos had begged for forgiveness and promised to change, so she decided to stay. However, in the months leading up to his disappearance, Elise said Marcos had become increasingly paranoid and difficult to live with. She suspected he was cheating again. While visiting her sick mother with their daughter, Elise saw the trip as the perfect opportunity to catch Marcos in the act. She hired a private investigator, and within just a week she got her confirmation. Each night Elise was away, Marcos was seen with the same woman, a sex worker named Natalia, whom he had met on the same website where he'd first met Elise. They met daily. Marcos took Natalia to the same restaurants and cafes he used to frequent with Elise. In some cases, he even chose the same table, seated in front of the same chefs. Elise felt publicly humiliated. She called it a blatant act of disrespect. But what she seemed to forget was that she herself had once played that very role, starting out as a paid companion before eventually becoming Marcos's legal wife. She even showed her in-laws the surveillance videos provided by the detective. Elise said she had confronted Marcos with the footage shortly before his disappearance, but unlike the first time, Marcos didn't beg for forgiveness or try to make excuses. He simply packed a bag and walked out. So, to her, it looked like he had just left the family. Marcos's parents believed her. His mother even apologized, saying, "I'm sorry I didn't raise my son better." She expressed deep sympathy for Elise and her granddaughter. This new information was passed on to the police, and the detectives dropped the ransom theory since no one had received any demands or contact. Around the same time, Marcos's brother received an email that appeared to be from Marcos himself. In it, Marcos stated that he had left home voluntarily. The email also included an apology to Elise and their daughter, but made no mention of where he was or how to reach him. When all of this information was compiled and handed over to detectives, police concluded that it served as proof Marcos was still alive, so they immediately called off the search. The entire situation appeared to be nothing more than a married man cheating on his wife and running away. For the investigators, this actually came as a relief. Domestic disputes like these often left them unsure of where to even begin. But just 1 week later, police brought devastating news to the Matsunaga family. Roughly 20 miles from Marcos's residence, along a deserted road, someone discovered a large suitcase in the roadside brush. Inside that suitcase was the dismembered body of Marcos Matsunaga, who had been missing for days. In addition to that suitcase, police found 2 more, one in an open field and another in the woods. The most disturbing part, the first body part discovered wasn't even in a bag. It was a bare leg tossed into the forest. Nearby in the tall grass, they found a green bag containing Marcos's clothes. At that point, before the head was found, authorities couldn't confirm the victim's identity. But based on the expensive clothing, they suspected the remains belonged to a wealthy middle-aged man. The final piece recovered was Marcos's head. Forensic investigators used dental records to confirm that the body parts found in the suitcases belonged to the missing millionaire, Marcos Matsunaga. 2 holes were visible in the skull, indicating a bullet had entered through the top of his head and exited through the chin. When all body parts were sent to the coroner, it became clear that the cuts were executed with precision and strategy. The person responsible was either a trained butcher or someone with significant knowledge of anatomy and biology. At this point, police had no leads or suspects, so their first step was to return to the apartment where Marcos had lived. Detectives pulled all available surveillance footage from the day he went missing. Elises had claimed that after Marcos left for work, he never came back. Investigators wanted to confirm what he was wearing that day and whether anything seemed off. On the surveillance footage, Marcos was indeed seen wearing the same outfit, shirt, and jeans he was reportedly last seen in. This suggested he had met his fate on the same day he disappeared. The next video was dated May 19, 2012, the day Elises returned from visiting her mother. Marcos had gone to the airport to pick up Elises and their daughter. The footage clearly showed the 3 of them returning home together. By this point, Elises must have been seething with anger, knowing she had undeniable proof of her husband's affair from the private investigator. But in the video, her demeanor appeared completely calm. Late that evening, security cameras once again captured footage of Marcos. He took the elevator down alone to pick up a pizza he had ordered. Some viewers later noted that Marcos appeared slightly tense in this video. He accepted the pizza from the delivery person and returned to the apartment. After that, Marcos was never seen on camera again. The following morning, security footage showed Elises struggling to drag 3 heavy suitcases out of the apartment by herself. She struggled to get the luggage into the elevator, clearly exerting a lot of effort. When she reappeared on the camera later, the suitcases were gone. That's when detectives finally began to piece things together. Even if they didn't yet know exactly what had happened inside that upscale apartment, it was now clear that Marcos's death was connected to his wife, Elises, because she had been the only one with him at the time. Elises was promptly arrested. At first, she denied everything, but after multiple exhausting interrogations, she finally confessed to the crime. According to Elises, she and Marcos had been arguing over the phone all day before she returned home. Even during the car ride from the airport, where Marcos picked her and their daughter up, they kept fighting. Once back at the apartment, neither of them felt like cooking, so they ordered a pizza. While waiting for the food, Marcos stood by the window, secretly taking a phone call. Afterward, he seemed a bit off. He told Elises it was his father on the phone, asking him to come by that night, so he'd be heading there after dinner. Elises immediately recognized the lie. Her private investigator had already informed her that Marcos had been spending every night of the previous week with his mistress. As the legal wife, she was furious that after an entire week apart, her husband was choosing to ditch her and their daughter just to see another woman. Naturally, Elises was enraged. She had intended to stay calm and try to talk things out, but hearing yet another lie about visiting his father pushed her over the edge. She began screaming, "I know you're lying!" This time, Marcos reacted in an unusual and cruel way. Instead of calming her down or apologizing, he lashed out. He called himself crazy and paranoid. Elises later claimed that throughout their relationship, Marcos often gaslit her, telling her she was mentally unstable and unfit to care for their daughter. That night, he didn't hold back. He insulted her, saying that if they got divorced, no wealthy man would ever want her again. When Elises brought up his affair once more, Marcos slapped her. It was the first time he had ever physically hit her. Elises shouted, "I'll use the evidence and file for divorce." But Marcos coldly responded, "Go ahead. But don't think you're taking our daughter. I'll have you committed to a mental hospital. You're not fit to raise her." Elise said everything after that moment became a blur. The emotional shock was too overwhelming, and her memory of that night is hazy. But she did remember one thing clearly. She picked up a firearm and shot Marcos while he was standing in the hallway. The distance between them was roughly 6 feet. After pulling the trigger, Elise realized there was no turning back. Panic set in. She was fully aware she'd likely spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her daughter would grow up without a father, and now without a mother too. Then a desperate thought crossed her mind. Try to cover up the crime. She claimed she didn't remember much else, except that she used a hunting knife they had often taken on trips to dismember the body. However, evidence presented in court later contradicted much of her version of events. The forensic report showed that the fatal wound on Marcos's head clearly entered from the top and exited through his chin. A close-range, downward trajectory like that could only have occurred at point-blank range, not from a distance of 6 feet, as Elise had claimed. Moreover, considering the height difference between the couple, it would have been nearly impossible for Elise to inflict that wound unless Marcos had been sitting or lying down, completely off guard, when he was attacked. Investigators also revealed that Elise had used various knife techniques. As a former nurse, she had a solid understanding of human anatomy. And thanks to years of hunting trips with Marcos, she had become skilled at using hunting knives. He had taught her how to skin and dismember animals himself. In a heartbreaking twist, everything Elise knew, she had learned from her husband. Yet she used the very tools he bought her to punish him for betraying her. Perhaps Marcos had been right. Maybe she was crazy. After all, how could a woman calmly dismember her husband's body, stuff it into suitcases, dump them on the roadside, and then return home pretending to be a grieving wife? At the time, everyone who interacted with Elise believed her sadness was real. In court, Elise's defense attorneys recounted the traumatic events of her childhood. They argued that her relationship with Marcos was far from the picture-perfect marriage it appeared to be. Behind closed doors, they claimed, the relationship was marked by manipulation, control, and emotional abuse. One witness testified that from the very beginning of their relationship, Marcos didn't allow Elise to have any male friends. While she was attending law school, he tracked her location every 30 minutes, asking where she was and who she was with. It got so bad that Elise had to warn her male classmates not to speak while she answered calls from her husband. Her lawyers pointed out Marcos's controlling nature. He frequently called Elise crazy, which over time made her feel worthless and broken. This was a case that deeply divided public opinion. One minute, you might sympathize with Elise. The next, you might be convinced she was a monster. Although many people at the trial expressed sympathy for Elise, there was a key detail that couldn't be ignored. Marcos had never physically assaulted her until the night of the murder. Everything seemed to escalate to a breaking point, and Elise claimed she acted in self-defense. News of a millionaire murdered by his own wife quickly became a national sensation. During the trial, public opinion was split. Interestingly, those who believed Elise were mostly women, while those who doubted her were primarily men. A recurring theme in court was Elise's controversial past. The prosecution repeatedly pointed out that she had once worked as a sex worker, implying that her motive was money. But if Elise had truly been a gold digger, then by all accounts, she had already succeeded. She had financial security, a child, and a privileged life. There was no obvious financial motive to kill. And even if she had once made mistakes out of desperation, did that mean she no longer deserved respect or understanding? Later, Marcos's family requested a DNA test on Elise's daughter. After confirming that the 2-year-old was indeed Marcos's biological child, the family took over guardianship of the girl. In the end, Elise was sentenced to 19 years in prison and is expected to be released in 2035. We believe that dismemberment always takes a crime to another level, because the killer has to sit there for hours. Just the smell alone, as you can imagine, would be unbearable. Elise has repeatedly said she feels guilty and deeply regrets what happened, that she acted purely in self-defense. What do you think about this case? Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comments. That wraps up our first case. Now let's move on to case number 2, This case took place in Japan several decades ago, and it led to major reforms within the Japanese police force. On the morning of October 18, 1963, along a mountain road west of Yoshida Station in Fukuoka Prefecture's Kyoto district, a lifeless male body was discovered. The victim was 58-year-old Murata Koshio, a delivery employee working for a logistics company. When found, he had suffered multiple stab wounds. The murder weapon, a metal awl, was recovered near the scene. Roughly 1.2 miles away, another victim was found. 38-year-old Morigoro, a co-worker of Murata. He was a truck driver, and his light delivery truck was parked several hundred yards from where his body was discovered. According to reports, Murata and Morigoro had been out collecting payments for their company. They had visited several customers with outstanding debts, and after completing their route, they stopped for dinner nearby. During the meal, Murata called a colleague at the office and confirmed they had successfully collected the payments. That call was made around 5 p.m. However, by 5:30 p.m., the company could no longer reach them. Concerned, co-workers contacted the police, but since night was approaching, authorities chose not to take immediate action. It wasn't until the following day that the bodies were discovered. The men were supposed to be carrying 430,000 yen in cash. However, only 160,000 yen remained. 270,000 yen had vanished. To understand the significance of this case, we must look at Japan's broader context at the time. The country was preparing to host its first Olympic Games since World War II. Determined to shed its war-tarnished image and present a peaceful, modern identity to the global community, Japan placed tremendous importance on the upcoming Olympics. In such a critical moment, a brutal double murder and robbery was an outrage, especially with 2 lives lost. From the authorities' perspective, this was a bold and reckless act. If public fear spread, or if the perpetrator remained at large near the capital, it could pose a serious threat. The thought of the same criminal attacking visiting athletes from other countries was unthinkable. This forced the police to focus intensely on solving the case. Typically, Japanese investigations at the time took weeks or even months. But in this case, the killer was identified within just 3 days. The victims' families explained that Murata and Morigoro usually went on collection runs together. Occasionally, they would be joined by another co-worker, but they didn't know his name. Investigators interviewed other employees and, through fingerprint comparisons, identified the third person as 37-year-old Nishiguchi Akira. On the day of the murder, he had been seen riding in the same small truck with the victims. 3 men went out to collect money. Now, 2 were dead, and the third had vanished, along with a large portion of the cash. Nishiguchi Akira immediately became the prime suspect. And after digging into his background, police realized this was no ordinary man. In fact, beyond these 2 murders and the theft, he already had 4 prior criminal convictions. Born in 1925 in Osaka, Nishiguchi Akira came from a family originally from Mishima Island. His parents had moved to Osaka to make a living. When he was 3 years old, they returned to Mishima and used the money they'd saved, along with help from relatives, to purchase several fishing boats, becoming boat owners. Nishiguchi's father was a shrewd businessman with foresight, and the family quickly rose to prominence on the island. In 1936, Nishiguchi Akira's father suddenly decided to leave the fishing business and instead invested in a fruit orchard in Fukuoka City, Fukuoka Prefecture. However, due to declining health, he was no longer able to continue the physically demanding work of farming. He gave up managing the orchard and purchased a hot spring inn in Beppu City, shifting his focus to the hospitality industry. From this, it's clear that the Nishiguchi family was relatively wealthy, and Akira grew up in a comfortable, well-off environment. The family had lived on Mishima Island for generations, dating back to the Edo period, and had secretly practiced Christianity. Deeply influenced by their Catholic faith, they remained devout across generations. Akira was baptized at the age of 5. During junior high school, Akira's father enrolled him in a Catholic mission school, hoping his son would one day become a monk or priest. Outwardly, Akira followed his father's wishes and entered the school, but internally he had no interest in that path. After enrolling, he quickly discovered the school's rules were far stricter than ordinary schools, and it was a full-time boarding institution. Having been spoiled his whole life, Akira couldn't handle the strict discipline and dropped out halfway through his second year. After leaving school, Akira began acting out, frequently committing petty theft. In 1942, at age 16, he was arrested by the Beppu Police Department for fraud and was sent to the Fukuoka Juvenile Court for rehabilitation. But soon after his release, he was arrested again, this time for theft, only 5 months later. The authorities, still seeing him as a minor, again sent him to juvenile court. However, less than 3 months after his release, he was once more arrested for fraud. This time, the court showed no leniency. Due to his repeated offenses, Akira was sentenced to 3 years in prison. In August 1945, Japan announced its unconditional surrender in World War II. Around that same time, 20-year-old Akira completed his prison term. The U.S. military forces stationed in Japan had established a translator training center in Osaka, and with no clear direction for his future, Akira enrolled in the program and studied English for 3 months. During that time, he met a young woman 1 year his junior. They quickly got married and had a child. After his release, in addition to learning English, Akira also obtained a driver's license. He took his wife back to his parents' home in Beppu, while he went to Fukuoka City to look for work. At age 20, despite his troubled past, he still had a chance to start over if he was truly willing to change. But unfortunately, Akira chose not to turn his life around. In 1948, he impersonated a member of the U.S. occupation forces to commit fraud and extortion. He was eventually arrested by the Osaka Police Department and sentenced to 2.5 years in prison. After serving his sentence, he opened a bar in Beppu targeting American soldiers and made a lot of money during the Korean War boom. However, whether out of greed or carelessness, in 1952, he returned to his old ways. Wearing a fake military uniform, he posed as a U.S. officer selling imported cars. After collecting money from prospective buyers, he vanished. He was later arrested by the Fukuoka Police Department and sentenced to 5 years in prison. 2 years after his release, he was once again convicted of fraud and sentenced to another 2.5 years. From his first time in prison through adulthood, Nishiguchi Akira was arrested 3 times and spent nearly 10 years behind bars, but he never seemed to learn his lesson. In 1962, after his release, Nishiguchi found work as a truck driver for a logistics company. During his time on the job, he discovered that Japan Tobacco had contracted the logistics company to handle cigarette distribution and payment collection. Seeing an opportunity, he quickly devised a plan to rob one of the cash transport routes. On October 18th, he waited for Murata Koshio, a man he knew was assigned to the tobacco distribution. He lied, claiming he'd help with deliveries. Once they met up with Morigoro, the cash collector, and both men were distracted, Akira attacked and killed them, stealing 270,000 yen. Because someone had seen Akira in the truck that day, and due to his criminal record, police immediately issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest once they realized what had happened. On the day after the murders, October 19th, Nishiguchi checked into a hotel in Fukuoka City with a sex worker. When he saw the morning newspaper with his name and photo on the front page, he fled the city and headed to Saga Prefecture. A habitual gambler, Nishiguchi went on to win 210,000 yen at a boat racing event in Saga on October 21st. Ironically, that same day he attended Mass at a church. Later that night, while back at his lodging, he saw a wanted poster with his face on it. Upon seeing the poster, he quickly mailed 2 letters, one to his wife in Fukuoka and another to the Fukuoka Police Department. In the letters, he wrote something along the lines of, "I've caused a lot of trouble for everyone, and I'm truly sorry. But I absolutely refuse to let you catch me and make a mockery of me. Therefore, I'll handle this myself first." Did handle this myself mean he was planning to end his own life? Sure enough, 5 days later, on October 24th, a coat and pair of black shoes were discovered on the deck of a coastal ferry. In the coat pocket was a letter signed by Nishiguchi. A passenger immediately contacted the police. So, Did Nishiguchi Akira really jump into the sea and take his own life? Police searched the waters surrounding the ferry for half a day, but never found a body. While investigating nearby shops, they also found a local store owner who said a man matching Nishiguchi's description had recently come in and bought a pair of secondhand shoes. Putting the pieces together, investigators realized the suicide was staged. Nishiguchi had faked his death to throw them off his trail. In reality, he was very much alive. Nishiguchi fled from Okayama to Kobe, then Osaka, Kyoto, and finally Sendai. Along the way, he assumed a new identity, claiming to be Professor Takahashi from Kyoto University. Not only did he change his name, he also wore glasses, dressed in long coats, and carried himself with a dignified air. At the time, media coverage wasn't nearly as widespread as it is today, so no one questioned his identity. Everyone who met him believed he was a real professor and treated him with respect. Nishiguchi had a remarkable talent for acting. While staying at a hotel in Shizuoka Prefecture, he introduced himself at the front desk as a university professor. He even told the receptionist that a colleague from Shizuoka University might be calling him soon. Later, when no one was paying attention, he slipped outside and used a public phone to call the hotel, pretending to be that very colleague, asking, "Is Professor Takahashi from Kyoto University staying there?" And then added, "This is a faculty member from Shizuoka University." Slowly but surely, everyone around him came to believe that Nishiguchi Akira was truly a university professor. However, since Nishiguchi Akira was still on the run, he never stayed long in any one place. After spending 2 days at the previous hotel, he moved to another hotel in Nagano City and assumed a new identity, now calling himself Professor Taegang from Kyoto University. The hotel was run by a woman named Fujita Kiyo and her elderly mother. Both deeply believed that Nishiguchi was indeed a university professor. Over time, Fujita Kiyo developed romantic feelings for him, and the two began a physical relationship. Because no one questioned his identity, Nishiguchi continued to travel freely, even visiting Hiroshima and other locations. So why Hiroshima? According to his later testimony, it was simply because he only had 800 yen left. Posing as a Kyoto University professor, he approached a Catholic priest at a church in Hiroshima and said, "I'd like to donate some televisions to the church, but I'm unfamiliar with the area. If you know any electronics stores, could you please write me a letter of introduction?" The priest, completely unsuspecting, wrote the letter for him. Using it, Nishiguchi managed to fraudulently obtain 5 televisions. He then pawned 4 of them and received 80,000 yen. But Nishiguchi burned through the money quickly. The 80,000 yen didn't last long. At that point, he turned his attention back to the Fujita family's wealth. Knowing that asking them directly would raise suspicion, he decided to take it all. After returning from Hiroshima, Nishiguchi murdered both Fujita and her mother and stole all of their valuables. He pawned the stolen goods for 150,000 yen and fled to Nagaoka City in Niigata Prefecture. This time, he adopted yet another identity, pretending to be a lawyer. He went to a law office and stole a legal badge, which is required in Japan to be officially recognized as a practicing attorney. He then traveled to Hokkaido, where he used this fake identity to scam an import business out of legal fees. Later, in the Tokyo area, he swindled multiple people under the same pretense, collecting legal fees while impersonating a lawyer. During his fraudulent operations, Nishiguchi set his sights on an 81-year-old attorney named Shinkichi Umamatsu. He learned that Umamatsu lived alone and had considerable wealth. On December 29th, he visited Umamatsu's office, claiming to seek help with a civil lawsuit. When Umamatsu let his guard down, Nishiguchi strangled him with a necktie. He then ransacked the apartment, stealing Umamatsu's lawyer badge, valuables, and 140,000 yen. He stuffed the victim's body into a closet where it was discovered 4 days later. Afterward, he even conned several other visitors out of money. By the end of the year, Nishiguchi had left the Tokyo area and was preparing to travel to Kyushu. Upon arrival, he used the alias Kawamura and posed as a lawyer from Tokyo. He sought out Furukawa Yasutaka, a prison reform official at Fukuoka prison, claiming he wanted to assist with his work. Why Furukawa? Years earlier, when Nishiguchi had served time in Fukuoka prison, he had seen Furukawa and remembered his face. Furukawa was grateful for what he believed was support from a fellow professional. He never suspected Nishiguchi's true identity and frequently engaged in deep conversations with him late into the night. One day, after school, Furukawa's daughter casually said to her mother, "That guest who keeps visiting our house looks a lot like Nishiguchi Akira from the wanted poster." How could a young girl remember the face of a wanted criminal so clearly? Because in her class, there was a student whose name differed by only one character from Nishiguchi Akira. She had seen the wanted poster on her way to school, found it interesting, and had looked at it carefully. "That's our guest. You shouldn't say things like that," her parents scolded her gently. Still, the comment planted a seed of doubt. The man calling himself Kawamura matched the description on the poster. His height, his facial features, everything. And thinking back, although he claimed to be a lawyer who graduated from the University of Tokyo, he hadn't been able to name a single famous professor when asked. Furukawa's wife grew increasingly uneasy. She rushed to the nearby bulletin board where the wanted posters were displayed and studied it carefully. No matter how she looked at it, the man in the photo was a match for their guest. She hurried home and discussed with her husband how they could protect the family without tipping Nishiguchi off. That night was harrowing. The couple acted completely normal, pretending nothing was wrong while sharing the house with Nishiguchi. Then, once he fell asleep, they quietly took their children and went straight to the police to report him. And just like that, after 77 days of murder, robbery, and evasion, Nishiguchi Akira was finally arrested. In August 1966, the court sentenced him to death. On December 11, 1970, at the age of 44, Nishiguchi was executed. He had come to be known as the Devil's Child. Interestingly, before his execution, he spent 6 months assisting a blind female student from Meiji Gakuin University by transcribing a philosophy textbook into Braille for her graduation thesis. After finishing the task, Nishiguchi reportedly said, "This is the first time I've ever worked seriously for someone else." This case shocked the entire country. Author Ryuzo Saki later wrote a novel inspired by the incident titled Vengeance is Mine, which won the 74th Naoki Prize and was adapted into a film. The manhunt for Nishiguchi Akira also prompted Japanese law enforcement to implement the Interprefectural Major Case Investigation Protocol, which improved cooperation and information sharing between police departments across Japan. And with that, the story of Nishiguchi Akira comes to an end. What made this case so unique was that typically, murderers and con artists are two distinct types of criminals, one violent, one manipulative. But Nishiguchi embodied both at once, something rarely seen. Even more unsettling is that criminals like him are often shaped by poverty or abuse in childhood. But that wasn't the case here. Nishiguchi came from a wealthy and loving family. He had a privileged upbringing, and attending a church school was something many admired. And yet, from that very environment emerged a cold-blooded criminal. He repeatedly defrauded others, and without hesitation, murdered his co-workers, his lover, and even an elderly man. His heart must have been ice cold. Fortunately, the man who once seemed impossible to capture was recognized by a child, and in the end, justice was served. Let this story be a reminder to always stay alert and stay safe. See you next time.